You could say I probably had a bit of fear around birth.
Welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Wimpenny. Today we have something really, really special to share with you because we have an incredible mother. Her name is Charlotte Gray and she's here to share her birth story with you. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you, Steff.
I'm so excited to have you here because your birth story is absolutely amazing. I cannot wait to share it. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
You're very, very welcome. I think we'll just dive straight into it. And I would really love to know, prior to your own experience with birth, what did you know about birth?
I would say, I think like a lot of women, your first sort of understanding of birth is what you've seen in movies. For me, I knew a lot about my mother's birth of me. My mother had four children and I knew everyone's birth stories. I knew my own birth story, which I think was the catalyst for why I took birth so seriously. I mean, my mom had a very traumatic birth. She had a natural birth, but you can still have a natural birth and have a traumatic birth. So she was in, her waters broke, she was induced. She ended up, I needed to be vacuumed out. I know we're getting right into all the fun stuff. I had to be vacuumed out. Yeah, and they broke my collarbone and she had quite a significant episiotomy, and that sort of gave her issues her entire life. So you could say I probably had a bit of fear around birth, just knowing my mother's story, and knowing, how it is such a big deal. It can change your life forever, really. And so I think that knowing that in a weird way was good, because it sort of meant that I didn't go into it with, I can't do anything. It'll all just play out how it's going to play out. And I'll just cross that bridge when I get to it. It'll be right. Like, I didn't have any of that sort of attitude. I kind of took it seriously from the moment I knew I was pregnant. I took it seriously.
Yeah.
I also I was classified as sort of like high risk, because my mum had some heart issues later on in life, which turned out to probably be genetic. So because of that, even though I'm not sort of 100% confirmed that I have an issue because I couldn't find any genes, but because of that risk, I was then classed as high risk. And just being classed as high risk is enough to start to, cause worries and issues and everything else. So I did have a bit to deal with, but I knew that my mum had 4 kids in a 5-year window in her late 30s. And so I was and she had no issues in terms of her heart. So I was, I guess, kind of leaning on that a lot.
Yeah. Optimistic. So that
to a fault, some would say.
That makes me wonder, obviously, after hearing about your mum's experience and how traumatic that was, hearing that you're potentially a high-risk birth, what on earth made you want to go down a path of a natural birth and, not just cesarean sort of thing?
Well, funny you should say that, because, when I first found out I was pregnant, I remembered a genetic cardiologist guy who sort of said to me, hey, if you ever get pregnant, I want you to let me know, because we'll want to check your heart, because your body releases hormones that makes all your ligaments relax. So we don't want your aorta, which is your main artery, and that's what we have that's weak in our family, or enlarged. He's like, that'll further relax your aorta potentially, and you could have issues. So I sort of went along for a scan with him at I think I was 16 weeks maybe, to scan my heart. And he was terrible. So he was he was terrible in that he specializes in pediatrics, like kids with congenital heart issues and the like. He's a lovely man, but he's just straight away started saying to me, your only option's to have a cesarean, and I wished you'd really spoken to me before you fell pregnant and all this. He's like, I had no idea you were going to try and conceive and all this. And I was like, mate, it's
come on, man.
And he was sort of saying, we could have done a preventative surgery on your heart, and if your heart gets bigger, and if it gets bigger before the baby's 27 weeks and we have to operate on you to save you, you're going to lose your baby.
Oh my goodness.
If your heart gets bigger, you know, before, like, gets rapidly increases in size, he's like, the only people who can do this surgery are in New Zealand, and we don't have approval to do it in Australia, so I don't know if we could fly you to New Zealand.
Whoa.
And he said to me, you know, your heart's, it's point something of a mil bigger already, and all that. So he's just unloaded all of this on me, and I was kind of there on my own. And of course, like, I started crying because it was just, here I came in so excited and, you know, happy and whatever, being pregnant, and then he was just there kind of like telling me, you know, your baby's going to die, like all this stuff. And I left, and I was, you know, quite upset. And I sort of had said to him, I want to just wait and see like how my heart's going, and please don't put a referral into RBWH, because RBW, Royal Brisbane Women's Hospital, is where you generally give birth in Brisbane if you are high risk, like maybe not for everything, but for anything to do with the heart, my understanding is you're always at RBWH.
Right.
And me, being the sneaky person I was trying to get into birth center there, which is, you know, for a water birth, and giving birth in a room that's like you're at home, you know, like very natural birth-esque anyway. But he'd put a referral in to let them know about my situation, so I couldn't try and sneak in there. But once I got there, you know, they were really good. They looked at what he'd written, and they said, that's, no one measures to that nth degree. That wouldn't be correct anyway. And they sort of said to me, hey, we've had plenty of women in your situation who go through and have a birth. So it was good that I finally got to, I guess, the right hospital and the right people who were familiar.
Absolutely.
But that initial part was just, it was not great. So seeing his reaction, and then of course knowing how my mother's birth went, I felt like with my mum, every time things started to go wrong was when she had interventions happen. And for me, my biggest fear, and people go, but like my biggest fear, I wasn't afraid of dying because I really didn't believe I was going to die. My biggest fear with childbirth was ending up with a cesarean or ending up with, you know, an episiotomy. Like, they were my fears. They were what I was afraid about.
Fear a cesarean?
I think just the whole, it is a major surgery. And just that whole thing of, you know, someone cutting you, and how many, I don't know if you've ever seen photos of how many layers they have to cut, but they have to cut you like a lot for a cesarean, like all through there, and then you can't do anything, you're in your bed. And I just really didn't want that. I don't know, it just, to me, was something I really wanted to avoid. For whatever other reason, I think that was just it. I just really didn't want to have that experience, and I wanted to have that experience of having my baby how I think, you know, our bodies are made to have our babies. So, and once I sort of started looking, how can I reduce my chances of cesarean, and of having, you know, an episiotomy or a trauma, you know, to me that's a traumatic birth, but those sorts of things, then that was when I started looking at, you know, natural birth and having a doula and all these sorts of things. So yeah, and being high risk, I kind of knew I was probably going to have a bit of an uphill battle to get a natural birth, because even when I went to RBWH, their first thing was, how do you feel about a cesarean? And I said, I don't want one. Like, I don't want to do it unless, of course, it's an absolute emergency and we have no choice. Or one of us is in danger, and that is the best option. So
that's it's so it's so funny. Like, they really, at least from my experience, cesarean was just like like the
it's
first
so casual
thing they come up with, and it's like they just assume that every woman is like, I love a cesarean, sign me up. Like, it's just so it's
very casual as well. Like, I felt like they just made it out to be just not a big deal at all.
It's nothing. It's I remember.
And then when you
showed me a photo, he's like, oh look, this is what it's going to look like like, here's you and here's your baby on the other side of the screen. And
yeah, and that was
great.
no, yeah.
Crazy.
And they're not without risks. And I think that was the
That's
other thing.
it.
When I started to read and I started to realize, I mean, there's risks with everything that we do. But yeah, when you start to realize there are risks and there are negatives, you know, some people are comfortable with those and they feel like the risks outweigh the benefits, the benefits outweigh the risks. But for me, when I read those things, I went, no, I don't. The risks.
Yeah,
it's not worth it. Yeah.
Love cesareans. You can talk about that all day.
Oh, yeah.
So then prior to giving birth, were you scared, nervous? What was going on for you sort of in the lead up?
So once I realized I was going to be high risk and, you know, I was trying to avoid all of these outcomes, first thing I Googled was kind of like how to not have a traumatic birth, and I ended up reading a lot of things by Ina May Gaskin, who's a midwife from America.
Okay.
She was a pretty famous midwife. They had a place called the Farm where they did a lot of natural birth and helped a lot of women have birth, a lot of VBAC, like vaginal birth after cesarean, a lot of women who were told they couldn't give birth natural, like physically, and they had really great results, like a 1% cesarean rate, and like and they've done thousands of births. And so I sort of got my hands on one of her books, and it's full of positive birth stories, full of stories of how people sort of stole a natural birth at a hospital, and she talks a lot about fear and how fear is like the biggest problem women face with giving birth is fear, and how, you know, when you give birth, it's all about relaxing and letting your monkey do it, like get into your primate brain, and you know, and she talks about cascade of intervention and how, you know,
say it again.
Cascade of intervention. So it's basically kind of like if you go in to get induced, that's when they give you the Syntocin or oxytocin. I think we call it Syntocin in Australia, so I'll call it Syntocin. And that's sort of the hormone that makes your uterus contract and brings on contractions. So your body naturally makes this. And that's basically what induction is they're giving you really high amounts of that hormone to bring on contractions. And for my mom, like she was hypersensitive to that. And so when she sort of went in at 10 a.m. because her waters had broken early, went in at 10 a.m. and they sort of hooked her up, she was so sensitive to painkillers and any kind of medication. She was very sensitive. And so she was like having these intense contractions. And I mean like the sort of contractions you have when it's like second stage and you're delivering the baby. So she had those kind of contractions with like seconds in between. And she went from like 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. and then she just couldn't push her body. Nothing was happening anymore. Like she couldn't push anymore and was just so exhausted. So kind of knowing that that's what happened with my mom, and then reading kind of Ina May's books and watching videos of her. She's got quite a few videos on TED Talks, YouTube, whatever. But reading all of that, it just kind of made me realize, yes. But I kind of realized, hey, if I can avoid induction, then I can potentially avoid other things happening. Because when you're induced and you're getting these really intense contractions, you're much more likely to then go, give me an epidural. Like I can't take this anymore. Like it's just so intense, so painful, so whatever. And so then once you get the epidural, sometimes it can then kind of slow things down. You're not sort of feeling things. Your body is like, whoa, what's all this stuff you're giving me? And then when it slows down, you know, they might up your Syntocin again, or they might go, hey, you're failing to progress. Everything's slowed down. You're taking too long. Baby's getting a bit distressed or whatever else. Oh, we need to do a cesarean now. So, you know, and it is something it is talked about quite a bit, this cascade of interventions. But I kind of saw that if I could just avoid induction, then I would give myself much better chance. And then when I started to look at, hey, how do I avoid induction? How to avoid all these things? That was when it sort of popped up with see a doula. So I am getting back to how was I fear-wise, but I feel like this kind of all created how I felt, if that makes sense.